Sweet. This is the first time we've had all four of us in one panel, so I'm excited. So hello, everyone. My name is Peter Kim. I'm the co-founder of Polymer Labs. Just real quick, we're basically taking IBC to all chains using ZK and optimistic validity proofs. I'll be the panel lead today. Longhash has asked that we keep this very builder-focused, so they wanted to reduce the VC presence on stage. But we'll start off with introductions with our esteemed panelists here.
Hi everyone, I'm Mo from Stellar. We are one of the most used interoperability protocols out there. We processed about $15 billion transaction volume in the last year, and support 4 different blockchains. Some of you probably used us before. And more recently, we start to kind of expand the horizon of interoperability by looking at the ZK co-processing and introduce a new initiative called Previous.
Hi, I'm Aakash. I'm a co-founder of Wormhole Labs. Wormhole is another interoperability protocol. We support 25 different networks, primarily focused on cross-chain messaging, one of the biggest applications of which is asset bridging. Some of the bigger bridges that you might be familiar with on Wormhole are things like Portal.
I'm Yorgos, co-founder of Axelar. We're the first decentralized interoperability protocol in production, currently 75 validators, most decentralized in practice, which is pretty important for security. I'm really happy to be in the panel with the other teams here. I think you are also, like, after Axelar, the most decentralized in the space, so real pleasure to finally meet all of you in person. And I guess one thing I'd like to highlight about Axelar is that we're not a bridge. We're an interoperability platform that allows developers to pass messages across chains and build cross-chain applications. So one way to think about it is that the same way that on a layer 1 you can build a decentralized exchange, a lending protocol, an NFT marketplace, on top of Axelar, you can build a cross-chain DEX, which is effectively a bridge. Cross-chain lending protocols, cross-chain marketplaces, and we have dozens of teams already building on top of Axelar.
Awesome. Thank you all for your introductions. So we have some questions prepared from our panelists and also from our organizers. So we'll go through and answer each of those. Just as a reminder, I'll also be answering them as like the lead/panelist. So we'll start off with milestones and challenges with the current solutions. What are the key milestones that interoperability solutions have achieved so far?
Oh yeah, sure. So I think we have definitely came a long way in the interoperability space. And as we know, especially like since end of 2020, we start to see a large range of different blockchains start popping up with their DeFi ecosystem. And one of the key problems back then was that there's no good way to really smoothly kind of merging these blockchains together in terms of liquidity, right? So that's the first problem. So you always had to kind of go back to some Ethereum through official bridges and then kind of go to another different blockchain, or even there's no way to do that, you have to go through a centralized exchanges. So that created a lot of friction for the users back then. And the first kind of application scenario for any cross-chain protocol is asset bridge, and we have definitely came a long way in that respect by enabling really kind of a smooth liquidity layer across all different kind of bridges, across all different blockchains, and enables a foundation layer to merge different blockchain experiences together as one. So I would say like that's kind of like definitely a great milestone for the entire community. And as we kind of expand this further down, we also enabled collectively cross-chain messaging, cross-chain kind of a message passing, general cross-chain contract calls that are enabling very exciting new applications. But I will leave this part to some other panelists to kind of talk more about.
Just real quick, I just want to say maybe we try to keep it interactive. Converse a bit so we don't go one by one, answer the question. I think we're all going to have very similar responses to what we've achieved for interoperability. So,
sure. No, I think to add to what Mo said, I think I agree. There's been a massive amount of progress when it comes to asset bridging specifically, which is one of the bigger use cases for cross-chain messaging. But the other big thing that has changed over the last few years is the specific focus on building interoperability protocols as generic message passing layers, right? The ability to build applications that are more than just cross-chain DEXs, right? So that we have cross-chain DeFi applications with the goal of concentrating liquidity, increasing addressable markets. Regardless of where the app is built, you should have and enable users from anywhere that you are. And that's where we're seeing a massive amount of focus today, given how far we've come with trust assumptions, expansion, and solving the liquidity problem. So like the next step is cross-chain as a developer-focused innovation going forward, as opposed to just a liquidity solution.
Absolutely, and until last year, if you wanted to build anything cross-chain, it was virtually impossible, right? If you're an application developer, you want to roll out something like a bridge, you have to roll out your own infrastructure, right? And I guess we have a saying in cryptography, never, roll out your own crypto. It's the same with cross-chain infrastructure. Like in interoperability, just use tested infrastructure, like the one all of us have built, and we're laser focused on building this infrastructure, right? We're not saying we're building infrastructure and applications. It's something you have to do full time, right? And over the last year, we're finally at a place where people can deploy cross-chain applications without actually having to worry that something will break or having to run their own centralized services underneath. Right? And to me, I think the biggest bottleneck now is education, right? There's a lot of confusion, especially with all the hacks. People are just very worried to touch anything cross-chain. Right, so I guess something I spent a lot of time doing is just educating developers, talking to them, and making sure they understand that it's not just bridging. There's all these things that you can build on top, right? And I think the way we get there is by having a core set of builders that are going to create an ecosystem and other builders can compose with, right? So the same way that back in the DeFi summer we had Uniswap come around, we have Compound, and then once those protocols were available, you have other developers that can build on top of them, compose with them, and build other interesting applications, right? So we're at this stage with cross-chain where we're just building out the primitives, but it's not something we can solve ourselves, right? We need all of the builders, the developers to actually adopt this new paradigm and start building, and only then will we get to mass adoption of our technology.
Yeah, I don't think we should underemphasize this, right? Like bridging or cross-chain solutions started off like exclusively as bridging solutions. I want to move liquidity from chain A, usually Ethereum, to my new network or chain B. I think the shift from thinking of it as a retail-focused application to a developer platform is what's really exciting about the future of cross-chain, right? Thinking about how do you build applications natively cross-chain first, not taking existing applications cross-chain as a secondary thought, or leaving the entire cross-chain application ecosystem to the retail user, right? Like bridging should not be the end-all be-all for cross-chain. Cross-chain development should be something that we think about as a first-class part of the stack when it comes to building dApps going forward.
Yeah. I mean, just to add on the previous two panelists, and especially, Georgios on the Acceler side. So, I think we have seen one point on the security side is that we have seen bridge as one of the most targeted area in any DeFi space. But the result of these kind of hard lessons in this space is that we actually start to become one of the most hardcore kind of a community in terms of pushing some new paradigm in building secure DeFi applications, right? So before bridges, I don't think any kind of application, the DeFi application, are thinking about proactive or defensive security, which is a very important concept here. So, before kind of all the bridging, lessons, people were thinking about, okay, I just build a DeFi application and launch it and do a bunch of audits and launch it in the wild and hope for the best, right? But after all these kind of hard lessons, especially when pushed by Acceler, Wormhole, and us, we are all starting to push for this kind of a narrative and the practices that you should build defensive mechanisms in the application post-launch, right? So like you should have invariant checks, for example, for bridges. If there's some token get burned on one side of the chain of the bridge, there should be kind of exact or almost matching amount of token that get minted on the other side. These kind of invariant checks, kind of continuous monitoring and defensive mechanisms is something that actually brought by the movement of kind of cross-chain bridge practice and now adopted by a much wider area of different kind of applications. Right, so this is also, I think, like a kind of a pretty major achievement done by the bridging community in general. And I think another point is that the bridging application, the interoperability space has been focusing on cross-chain, but when the way we at Cetera and the Brevis is looking at this is that the interoperability actually goes beyond just the kind of sending message from one chain to another and kind of coordinating between different chains. Inside a single blockchain, you also have some very interesting interoperability problems, right? So if you look at smart contract today, it has very limited interoperability even inside the blockchain, right? So it has no visibility to the past state even in the same chain or different blockchains. It has no visibility for internal state that is not exposed by view-only functions for other smart contract. But these things should be accessible for the blockchain applications, for example, to build VIP trader programs for DEXs. You don't see any VIP trader programs for DEXs because they don't have this kind of a interoperable data accessibility. So this is also kind of a frontier I think is very interesting to push forward.
I'm happy to see that we're also excited about the progress we've all made in interoperability. I'd like to shift focus a little bit. I think it's no question that interop is one of the most difficult verticals to tackle in blockchain. I think it's also no question that it's one of the biggest targets. We've seen, billions in hacks over the past few years. I guess as a summary of this conversation, and this is something that I describe with some of my friends when they ask about interop, is that, or the evolution of interop, is that from like 2019 to 2022, Interop 1.0 was like asset bridging with organizations like Ren Protocol and like Thorchain. Interop 2.0 has been like a bit of a push for Polkadot's like XCMP and Cosmos's IBC. And the projects we're seeing come out now are kind of flavors of these different approaches, whether it's like validator sets or state proofs between chains. The question prepared here is asking, what are some challenges with current interoperability solutions? I'd like to go a step further and ask, like, we're 4 different interop projects, and there's probably like 10 others that aren't here right now. How do you guys see like Web3 interop evolving when like we're supposed to be the guys that are helping reduce liquidity fragmentation, but I'd actually argue that we're all increasing. Well, we're not live yet, but the guys that are live are increasing liquidity fragmentation. So how do you guys see this evolving?
I think that's a great question. Part of the context there is that there's a couple different ways to implement bridging, and a lot of them have mutually exclusive liquidity mechanisms. And so if you're, like, for example, minting wrapped assets, those are not interchangeable with the wrapped assets of another network or another bridging solution. That's effectively, one of the things that we're alluding to here when we say that when we're trying to solve the liquidity problem, we as individual solutions are creating new liquidity problems. And I think this goes back to like what all three of us touched on, which is the renewed and emphasized focus on cross-chain messaging as the core product enables new kinds of bridging solutions. And what you're seeing as most popular in the market today is the ability to basically bridge via cross-chain dexes. I have asset A on chain 1, which is like, let's use ETH as the example, and I want asset B on chain 2. Let's use SWI as an example on the SWI network. You can do this in one of 2 ways. You can either bridge ETH over and end up with a wrapped version of ETH on SWI, or you can literally trade ETH for SWI in the relevant notional contexts. And you're seeing bridging taking the latter approach because that's what's fundamentally more useful, right? And that's capable today because of what cross-chain protocols like the 4 of us up here and the others that aren't have evolved towards. And I think that is actually solving the problems that were initially created by different bridging implementations and bridging approaches, because it's a users first approach. It gives the users the utility that they're actually looking for, as opposed to saying, adopt my standard, adopt my assets in order to solve your problems.
On that note of being users first with the interop solutions and their designs, are you guys at all concerned that that the approaches today by interop solutions are focusing maybe too much on users today rather than users in the future, like 10 years from now? Because and this is where like I'll throw in like the Polymer perspective. Our concern is that a lot of interop designs are optimizing for the pain points that everyone's feeling right now, but not necessarily thinking of future-proofing the solution to be completely generic on like a 10-year time frame. I guess what I'm trying to get at is that a lot of interop solutions opt more for like vendor lock-in for like a type of solution rather than how do we make this as open and neutral as possible?
Maybe I'll start with the Axelar perspective. And we're all improving, right? So the state right now is that, we, at least from the Axelar perspective, we have the most decentralized validator set, but in the future we do plan to include technologies like zk-alias client proofs and whatever else becomes available, right? And we designed our stack in a modular fashion so that it's quite easy to add those other proof mechanisms in the future. When it comes to vendor lock-in, I'm personally not that worried, right? As an application, you can always add more messaging protocols, right? It's something you can determine on the application layer. So I guess it is a possibility, like with the current models, but it's very easy for developers to go around it, like, and keep a flexible design. I think Aakash made a really good point earlier in that you have to start day one when you're thinking about cross-chain, right? So as a developer, if you're starting with a mindset that I'm going to be on every chain, I'm going to be available everywhere, then it's very easy to start with a design where you can incorporate multiple messaging protocols. But if you start building on a single chain and do not take this into account, then you may end up into vendor lock-in. And that's why with a lot of our developers in our ecosystem, we urge them to at least, even if they don't go cross-chain day one, at least start thinking about the trade-offs and how they can future-proof their application.
Yeah, I mean, like, there are definitely some things in the space right now that is not kind of perfectly ideal in the sense that if you look at the new blockchain that are getting launched, and let's say Sui or Aptos, if you look at the USDC, USDT, or kind of a bridge ETH asset on these new kind of blockchains, you will probably see 3-4 different kind of bridged assets, and we are on there. So that's definitely kind of a difficulty that we need to recognize as a community now. But I think the root cause for that is that we need to kind of evolve with the underlying blockchain ecosystem, right? So like the blockchain ecosystem today started really kind of get ignited this, in mid 2020 to 2021 with the DeFi movement. So if you look at all the new blockchains that are popping up, they're all kind of trying to repeat the playbook of bootstrapping a DeFi ecosystem, bootstrapping liquidity there, and so on and so forth. So naturally, this forces liquidity to flow. Liquidity has to flow into this DeFi ecosystem so that they can kind of establish a place in the kind of DeFi ranks. In the current state, but we believe that over time, we will start to just like we start with the stem cells, and then different stem cells will actually evolve and kind of diversify into different kind of organs. We envision in the future that different applications and different blockchains will actually differentiate. When that differentiation starts to happen, the underlying cross-chain and the interoperability solution will also evolve so that we are not just the kind of just like blood vessels, transporting same blood to all the different kind of parts of the organism, but actually kind of just have the capability to coordinate between different organs, like different kind of blockchains. So this is like how we see the evolution of the interoperability space. As for kind of the underlying technology, I think every kind of a bridging solution are looking at empowering kind of a trust and minimized solution whenever and wherever possible and applicable, like ZK bridging and functionalities like that.
Yeah, and Mo, I think you brought up the liquidity fragmentation, right, with wrapped assets, and Peter, you also had a question earlier about it. On the asset level, I'm personally very optimistic that this won't be a problem in the long run. Right? Aakash also made a great point around it. Native assets are launching on most major chains. Maybe the way you bootstrap an ecosystem is by having those wrapped assets, but in the long run, especially the stable coins, which are the highest TVL assets, are going to be launching natively on different chains. And even if you have different versions, you can use cross-chain dexes to seamlessly move across different chains. And ideally, the user doesn't even know that they're using different versions of stablecoins. There is also a different layer of fragmentation, right, when it comes to the messaging part and the developer experience. Because we're all building our own messaging protocols, and the way developers interact are going to be a little different, right, from protocol to protocol. And there's definitely fragmentation. I guess my personal opinion is that this will be solved naturally, right? The solutions that get the highest developer market share, will get widely adopted and they will become the standard over time, right? So I feel like even on the developer layer, the market will naturally lead us to a future where the solutions will be standardized, but that still remains to be seen, of course.
And I think you actually see a lot of it right today, right? Like market forces push bridging in the direction of applications like Squid Router or Hashflow, where you're seeing asset-for-asset transfers being, or exchanges being like the preferred route for retail users because you end up with the assets that you want. So like when you take the vendor lock-in strategy, you have diminishing returns, right? Like it may be very useful on day one, but as the ecosystem grows, as the ecosystem gets a native USDC, as the ecosystem gets more and more valuable native assets, a wrapped asset strategy or a locked-in strategy from a bridging perspective just doesn't make any sense. You're hurting the users, you're hurting the ecosystem, and users will eventually gravitate, and thankfully it's a very competitive market, they'll gravitate towards the application that gives them the assets that matter in a specific context.
All right, I want to take a step back and try to make this much more personable to the audience, or at least more human. My question to you guys is, what makes you the most excited about tackling interoperability?
Yeah, maybe I'll go first. I mean, it's inevitable that in the future we're going to have hundreds of chains, each with significant economic activity on top of them, right? I think we're all in agreement that a single state machine is not going to scale to support all applications in the space, right? And there's many forces, also like different application developers, they will want to have their own blockchains, their own block space for scalability, but also it's a nice way to monetize, right? To capture revenue for their protocol. So I think this future, we're probably all in agreement that it is inevitable. And in such a future, people will have to move back and forth, right? Hundreds of blockchains. I guess my personal guess is that about 20% of all transactions across the space are going to be across chains, right? And you can imagine if a single layer one, like, has 100,000 transactions per day, or probably 100 million, hopefully, cross-chain, we're going to have like a few orders of magnitude higher than that, right? So I think the opportunity is massive, but I also think the technology is like fundamental in order for the space to grow. Because if you don't have cross-chain, it's going to be impossible for people to use the technology, and also the user experience is not going to be great, right? So the future we envision with Axelar, and I'm sure a lot of the other panelists as well, is one where we have this Web 2-like experience. People just have to think about assets, applications. A user should not know if the asset lives on Solana, the application lives on Avalanche. All that should be abstracted away. And interoperability is a critical part to get there.
I actually think that that's a really great answer, like from Georges, with respect to the idea that if you're envisioning, everyone talks about this, whether you're in interoperability or not, but everyone talks about envisioning a future in which the networks themselves are abstracted from the end users, and interoperability is an essential but it's a required but not like sufficient piece of that whole thing. And what's personally exciting to me is that what we are building as interoperability solutions are developer platforms, two-sided developer platforms, and that's really it's an interesting problem to solve, whether it's Web3 or something else. And it gives you a lot of freedom as to how you shape how developers continue to build applications. Like what we envision as a necessary step to get to the future that Georges was describing is developers that genuinely think about building Wormhole first applications, right? So like you are not building a specific application for a specific network, but you're building an application that takes advantage of certain network capabilities to be a Web3 based application, and you want to do it without any barriers to user bases, right? So if you have fragmented user bases across networks, that shouldn't matter to you. And so by building on top of cross-chain interoperability applications as your developer foundation layer, you achieve that. And so we think about this as a problem of our developers' problems. And that's really fun. Like that's what nerd sniped me into thinking about interoperability solutions, is that how do you build the best solution for builders to build on top of you?
And to be clear, this future is not one we can build ourselves, right? We're building the infrastructure here, the messaging, to make it easier for developers to build on top, but we need account abstraction. We need many different layers, right? So this is something we're going to achieve as a community, and that's why education is important, and getting people to build cross-chain applications is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with both of you guys. And just on top of that, we are definitely kind of trying to move towards a future where the states, the messages, and also the assets are all merged as one, and you kind of have a unified layer to build against and also use for users, right? So, but what we are most excited about in Stellar and also Brevis is that we are seeing that in the interoperability space goes beyond bringing one message from one chain to another. The interoperability problem actually also exists even within a blockchain today as well, right? So if you look at smart contracts today, they have very, very limited visibility to any data, really. Like, even though that, you can imagine all the blockchain data is all sitting in the blockchain, but if you're a smart contract, your visibility is only limited at the current block. There is no way to access, for example, any user's past transactions. If you want to kind of calculate what is this user's past trading volume on Uniswap, you simply cannot do that today, right? So this is drastically different from what Web 2 is having today, where you can have very, very easy to use databases that are just sitting there and query easily and construct new functionalities on your applications, right? So this kind of thing that is missing, and we are seeing this become very major user pain point today. For example, if you look at all the centralized exchanges, any centralized exchanges, and you go to them, there will always be this VIP trader program based on your past trading volume. But if you look at blockchain today, you just simply cannot find any DEX that has such functionality. The reason for that is the missing interoperability between the smart contract and its past record and past data and past transactions, right? So this is like what we're seeing as a major interest point for the community going forward. That is, once you start to have the capability to access all past user transactions and activities, you can build very interesting applications and enable very exciting functionalities for user retention, for user gating, for many other things. And this is just not within a single blockchain, combined with cross-chain block header relay and kind of a ZK bridging. You can actually access the merge states and read states across many different blockchains. So this is like a new frontier that we're pushing, and we're very excited about that.
Just to add on to our panelists' responses and I guess share a bit more of an analogy, right? I think we're all in this room because we're more or less excited about blockchains in general. The way that we discuss blockchains and interoperability at Polymer is that with the Web 2 analogy, blockchains are basically like computers. And when computers were invented, they didn't really know how to speak to each other. There was a period of time in like the late 1900s where it's called the Protocol Wars, where there were several different organizations and universities and companies trying to create this standard for the internet, for standards for how these computers speak to each other. And the four of us on this stage, and of course anyone else in the audience that would like to join later on, have the opportunity to shape what is basically the internet for blockchains. The way that we see it is that everything that's been built up until now has been super exciting, very innovative. Like all this stuff with DeFi is just mind blowing. But what I'm most excited about is the applications and developers and projects that will come out in 5 years that will completely replace the projects that exist today. And I firmly believe, like, we think that what's been built so far is innovative, but I don't think we can even imagine what's going to come once interoperability is really established.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a great point. That is, the way people are thinking about building applications are very much related to the underlying availability of infrastructures, right? So, like, if you ask a DeFi builder, just 1 year ago, they wouldn't even think about like cross-chain governance and cross-chain kind of liquidity merging and cross-chain yield mining. These things are not in their mind because they're simply not possible. But once they build the application and to kind of transform that into a omni-chain native or kind of a cross-chain enabled application, it's actually pretty hard. So this opens a great opportunity for new application builders to actually capture that vacancy there to build new kind of application with better user experience and better kind of liquidity, interoperability, and also messaging interoperability as well.
100%. I had a conversation with my team member Johanna the other day about this question on like what's more important, infrastructure or applications. And the conclusion we both kind of came to was that they're both equally important and they both inform each other's innovations. We see all the pain points of Aave and Curve deploying on all these different chains and those deployments not really communicating with each other seamlessly. And we realized, oh, this is a big pain point. We need to build an interop solution. And once we have these interop solutions like the 3 of yours that are live, you see applications build on top of that. And then we see the pain points of those applications, and we create additional innovations on top of that. I think the analogy that Johanna had came up with was like when you're building like the first car, you have like the difficult part is building the engine, and then you put a box around it so you can sit in it. And then later on you sit in that car and you're like, this box sucks, I need some seats and maybe some air conditioning. And as you're doing that, you know, they're like, oh wait, the car's getting heavier, we need a better engine. So you're over the span of like, you know, several years or decades, you're building on top of each other's imagination. And, you know, that, you know, to me is super exciting. We're enabling the next generation of application builders to think outside the box, think outside of just the current AMMs and lending protocols that exist.
A great analogy. I might steal that in the future.
Please give Johanna credit.
Will do.
Me too. At least we have good engines today to get going, right? Over the past 3 years, we just had these cars like with basically, I don't know what was running inside. It looked like it was working, but you know, at least we're at a good starting point, right? And we're getting there.
Yeah, and you know, for us, we had to experience something within blockchain for us to like tackle interop itself. Like it would be incorrect for us to say like we were as forward-looking as like the guys that came up with Polkadot and with Cosmos. Like back in 2017, these guys were thinking where the puck is going. They thought, you know, Bitcoin exists, Ethereum exists, all these different alt ones are popping up, like, you know, Neo back in the day, and they were like, wait a sec, these guys don't talk, we need to make them talk. So all the building that went into like Polkadot and Cosmos IBC, we got to learn from and we get to build on top of. So cool. I'm gonna throw in another question that Longhash had prepared for us. The Uniswap bridge assessment report suggested that multi-bridge solutions are needed to increase cross-chain security. Do you agree or disagree? And I guess to elaborate, it's like multi-bridge solutions as in you require X out of Y number of bridges to validate a message.
Yeah, I think the uni bridge assessment is really interesting. So the uni bridge assessment said a lot of things. I think we'd be remiss not to acknowledge that it decided that Wormhole and Axelar were the most secure out of the options that they actually took a look at. And now, the reason they decided this is because we have decentralized, what we refer to as guardian networks, but basically validators that reinforce the security of our cross-chain messaging applications. And for those who weren't familiar with what the Uni Bridge assessment was for, Uniswap needed a way to broadcast governance votes from ETH to networks where they have deployed the Uni protocol. And so it's a cross-chain messaging use case, not an asset transfer use case. They wanted to find the most secure mechanism to do so because it became a very hotly contested kind of vendor competition between the interoperability protocols. And so one of the things that came out of the assessment was we likely get the best benefits of all the worlds if we use multiple bridges to validate every single message that we want to send between Ethereum and other networks that Uni has deployed on. Now, that is an extended way of saying that the most important thing that you want to ensure when using interoperability protocols is a decentralized validation mechanism. You want independent operators validating that a message actually happened when you are broadcasting that to recipient networks. And that's, again, the same reason, like this circular logic, right? It's the same reason that Axelar and Wormhole came out on top when it came out on top of the security assessment. I think so then to answer your question directly, right? Like, do you actually need multiple bridges in order to be super secure? The implicit assumption in that is that every existing bridge, despite having independent operators validating those messages, has some sort of collusion risk that is unique to within the bridging ecosystem itself. So like in our case, it would be allegedly amongst our 19 guardians. That I don't actually think is inherently true. I think, for example, in our case, we have 19 independent guardians that all do their own thing. They are for-profit companies that are professional validator operators for major blockchain networks. And they also happen to validate Wormhole messages. Now, the idea that they would collude or they're more likely to collude than any of the other mechanisms within Web3 that require independent operators is unsubstantiated. I can't disagree that you would get more secure assumptions just the larger that number grows, which will inherently grow if you use multiple bridges. But I don't think it's the end-all, be-all solution, right? You have solutions like zero-knowledge proof-based bridging, which will likely take you in a much more final direction with regards to security assumptions, right? I think personally, the view that we hold at Wormhole is that we're excited about a future in which Wormhole messages are validated not only by an independent guardian network, but by zero-knowledge like clients as well, where you have both of these operating and acting as redundant message provers. And so that's how we think about that, right? So it's not inherently wrong, but it's not the end-all, be-all statement.
So my opinion on this suggestion by the Uniswap report is that it's the most risk diversified best suggestion for what we have today. The way that I kind of simplify it, like another analogy would be like, if you're Uniswap and you need to, send this message of a governance decision, do you want to have, for example, 5 people tell you yes, or do you want one person to say yes and this is why? So like, for example, is it 2 + 2? And everyone's like, yeah, this is 4. Versus one person to say it's 2 + 2 because it's 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 and it's 4. Like, that's the proof. I think down the line, we're going to go in the future down this path of like actually having the proof rather than having people with a validator set. And obviously, I'm biased here. With a validator set, say, this is the answer. I think down the line, and this is because, with Polymer, we're focused so much on IBC. For those that aren't aware, IBC does, with light clients, does state verification. It's, in its current state, more costly because you're actually doing the math to show something. But with ZK proofs, we'll reduce that cost and make it competitive with validator sets.
And
Yes.
yeah, just to answer, I guess, directly the question as well, is multi-bridge meaningful today? I think yes and no. I think the answer is no from a purely theoretical, mathematical perspective, but yes from an implementation perspective, right? So to the point that I guess you made, let's say we get Axelar and Wormhole together, right, to validate a message cross-chain. We have 75 validators today, Wormhole has 19, we're both scaling. Let's put them together today. Okay, you get 94 validators. Is that gonna make a substantial difference? Probably not, right? So from a mathematical perspective, we're probably better off just scaling Axelar by an additional 20 validators rather than adding complexity by adding an additional messaging protocol. But from an implementation perspective, we have very different implementations, right? Like, and some of the biggest hacks over the past few years were implementation bugs. And so by combining Axelar and Wormhole, you could very well like have 2 distinct implementations where both should break in order to lose funds. Now, I don't think this is gonna happen like in the near term, just because it's quite hard to do.
Knock on wood.
Sorry?
Knock on wood.
Yeah, I guess my sense is that it's very hard to build on top of like most of the messaging interoperability protocols today, right? And you're gonna have reliability issues, like things are not gonna work, so developers are gonna opt to go with one more secure solution that is easy to build with, right? So while I think, yeah, in the long term, like it's the best approach, and when I think of multi-bridge, it will incorporate like the ZK IBC that Polymer is building, other ZK protocols, like also validator sets. I think we should have these multi-path instantiations where you need all of the different clients and proofs to actually like go through in order to pass a message, right? But I think it's gonna take a while to happen just because most of the developer tooling on most of the solutions like is just not mature enough.
So we have just a couple minutes left. I want to get 2 more like high-level questions that hopefully connect more with the audience. One, you're talking about difficulties of building on top of interop solutions. Earlier, we were talking about what's most exciting to build in interop. I'd like to do the flip side of that question. What has been the most challenging for you guys in trying to build interop? And please try to keep it 1 sentence. I have another question as well.
Personally, it's that interop comes down to 3 things, right? You have security, ubiquity, and capability/DevX. Optimizing for all 3 is how you build the best solution, but resources are finite. And you'll make progress in one vector and not in the other 2, or 2 and not 1, and you won't be able to reap the rewards.
Yeah, I think the most challenging part faced by all of us is like to kind of shape the paradigm of kind of cross-chain applications for the developer community, right? So like many of the developers are not thinking cross-chain as their first priority, and this is something that we are all kind of pushing towards, basically. But still, just want to kind of quickly respond to your kind of Uniswap multi-bridge question, because we are the proposer of that solution, and therefore naturally we're very a big champion for that. I don't think like any of these kind of concerns are not stemmed from the validator side or in theory, right? So like many of the hacks like the Wormhole hack, Nomad hack are not because of the validator are colluding in any way. It's just the smart contract risk. The entire software stack is relatively new. And this is like a very natural choice for a high-value, low-frequency application use case like cross-chain governance to actually have multiple different independent solutions, just like how you have multiple Ethereum clients today. They're all kind of running, even for Ethereum clients, they're all even running the exact same kind of consensus of protocol, but they still have different implementation for redundancy of liveness and the redundancy of security. So this is something that we think makes a lot of sense and has been pushing pretty strongly forward for the community as well.
Yeah, so I think we totally agree here. Like client diversification is the most important thing, probably, like in the long run.
What has been most challenging for you, Urios?
So I think like the other panelists covered some of the technical difficulties. I'd say for us, like one of the most difficult parts was we took about 2 years just building with 20 engineers, like, and one community person, right? And it took a lot of conviction. It's a very hard problem, right? And I think Wormhole, actually, Mo, I don't know like too much about the history of like how you got started, but I know Wormhole was the other protocol we knew from the early days, and they were also very focused on building the core messaging layer, like decentralizing it, right? And you were looking at other teams, launching in the space, effectively launching those bridges, capturing market share, and claiming they're decentralized, and no one knew what was going on the back end, right? And you had no way to verify because it was all closed source and opaque. So I think for us, like just maintaining the conviction and like continue building for 2 years without actually launching any user-facing product was the hardest part, right? And obviously, like, it paid off in the long run, but yeah, in retrospect, like, you need a lot of conviction to build in the space, and, a lot of respect to all of you for doing that.
And last question, what advice would you give to members of the audience for anyone interested in building an interop? What would be like your call to action? And feel free to show your project for like 5 seconds about what you're coming up with over the next few months.
I think,
but keep it short, please.
yeah, super short. Every application at some point will think about how to increase their addressable market, and if they're a DeFi application, how to concentrate liquidity. It's much harder to think about going cross-chain once you've entrenched yourself in an ecosystem than it is to think about how to build cross-chain from the beginning. And the thing that Wormhole and other interoperability protocols are focusing on right now is really emphasizing the developer experience around building cross-chain applications, making it as easy to start as possible, such that you can build an application that's inherently cross-chain from the beginning and reaps all the benefits and rewards of doing that.
Absolutely, yeah, that would have been my answer as well. Yeah, I was just speaking with a founder today, building on Axelar, and he basically told me that, they see some of their competitors that have been around for a while, and now they're starting to think about cross-chain. It's going to take those competitors up to a year just to, revamp their architecture and just become cross-chain compatible, right? So given where the future is going, just, yeah, take a look at, what's possible with cross-chain. Even if you don't incorporate cross-chain messaging, at the very least, you will have a sense of how to architecture your application. And, it's also not that hard, right? Like, just go to our documentation with Axelar, dev.axelar.network. It takes about 10 minutes to send your first message cross-chain, right? So just give it a try, spend 2-3 days, so at least you have a sense of how you can future-proof your application.
Well, from our end, I think like, we just want to kind of highlight that the interoperability is an evolving concept, and for us, it has evolved beyond just cross-chain messaging, and if you're interested in access any kind of data in the history in different chains on this in your smart contract directly, Cetera and Brevis is a solution that you may want to take a look at. But in the end of the day, really get your hands dirty and try all the interoperability solutions out in the market. And there are differences for sure in the API layer, in the user experience layer, and so on and so forth. So definitely try them out and kind of choose whichever one you are most comfortable with.
I'd say my call to action to people in the audience is to think about why blockchains were made, what the ethos and the values were, and then apply that to the designs of the different interoperability solutions. For us, we really resonated with the whole decentralized, permissionless, immutable aspect of blockchains. And we think that the end goal, the end game of interoperability is going to be taking those values and implementing them into their designs. There's several, I would also urge you to look into like the intricacies and differences between all the different solutions. There's several articles out there. Jim Chang from Catalyst has written articles. Maven 11 has written great articles. Longhash has also written articles on this. Van Eck has done a comparison of putting all the projects on a spectrum of decentralization. I'd say try to see the direction of like the values of these organizations and the designs that and how those values are implemented into the designs. The 5-second shill here is that Polymer will be launching testnet in the near future. We're actively hiring. We're actively looking for developers and people to test our testnet. If you like a challenge, little fun fact statistic is that in a recent period of time, we interviewed like 120 people and only extended like 5 offers. So if you want a challenge, please reach out.